Hello Art 1-2 and welcome to your demonstration, which is part one of the value worksheet. So we're going to work on our value scales, we're going to do some annotating, we're actually going to write all over this paper. And then part two, tomorrow we'll be shading the actual items. So it's broken down into two parts. So you'll need this worksheet that's in your new set of papers. You'll need something to write with. So I went ahead and wrote my name and period at the top. So you need to write your name and period. And just make sure you include that in with your photographs when you submit, because we're going to write all over the bottom. So we're just going to keep your name at the top. This is that cream sheet of paper. You have like 3 of them in your set. It's kind of yellowish. And so we'll use that. You can just set that aside. And you're going to need your chunk of newspaper. So you can use your old chunk of newspaper. You got a new one that would be for the watercolor. Or if you only have the one that I gave you, then you can use what you have. All right, you're going to pull out the smaller Ziploc bag out of the bigger one that you got, and which is all your shading stuff. And I pulled out my red sharpener from the old set, and I'm putting it into this Ziploc bag because now you're going to use it for the shading pencils. Okay, so we have our value worksheet. You're going to set it on top of the newspaper. So you just watched a video on how pencils are made. And so you received, close that real fast. You received a 2B and a 6B pencil. And we use these to create different values. And so we're going to use them on the value scale. So notice that there are numbers on there. And we're going to draw kind of like arrow across the top, HB, and then an arrow. So if you ever go buy shading pencils, there's lots of different numbers. So I'm going to tell you what those mean. So you have HB, which is in the middle. This happens to be a 2HB, which is like soft and hard. So the H is hard, the B stands for soft. It comes from a German translation. So we would have 2B, which is a light soft pencil, 4B, 6B, and they make an 8B, and then they do make a 9B. A few brands do. So you're getting a really light soft shading pencil, and you're getting a darker soft shading pencil. And so then if you ever buy a set of pencils, on the other end are the hard pencils. So 2H is really light and a hard graphite. And then we have 4H and 6H and 8H. So H means hard and B means soft. In the pencil world, the shading pencil world. So if you have your own set, you're more than welcome to use your own. Obviously, these are the ones that are provided to you. These are not super cheap. They're like mid-level as far as quality of graphite goes. So in the video, it talked about having like less adhesive and more clay. This is like middle of the road. All right, so what we're going to do is a value scale. So this is what this is right here. Value scale. And we're going to kind of break it up into using different pencils. So from like the 2 to the 5, you're going to use your 2B. And then layering 5 to a level 8 on the value scale, you'll use your 6B. And so it helps you create a full range of value. For 1, it's white. And that one actually didn't copy very well. It's supposed to be super light gray. But white is just going to stay the white of the paper all the time. If an area is white, obviously you just leave it alone. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do is you're going to grab your 2B and 6B pencils. And 2B is fairly light. So we're going to remind ourselves how to hold the pencils. So just like when we did the cubism, and you're kind of holding it horizontally, holding the pencil horizontally, trying to use the whole side of the pigment stick. Well, now we're trying to use the whole side of the graphite stick. So for 2B, it's a light value. And so there is a note sheet in Google Classroom, and we have some shading reminders on here. And one of them, the first one is newspaper padding which is the newspaper. We have a scratch piece of paper to go under our arm, which is this paper. And then step 2 says circular motion when applying graphite. So if you miss anything, or if you forget by the time we start shading the still life, or if you want to review for your self-portrait, or your test is also going to be in pencil, all this will still be in Google Classroom for you. So circular motion. Okay, so when we say circular motion, I do literally mean like circles, but that's using the tip of the graphite, which that would take forever to shade that way. So test it out. Okay, now you're going to hold your pencil like horizontally. So it's almost like you set the pencil down and you just pick it up and your fingers are kind of flat. And so I would put my hand like in the middle of the pencil, and you can always bring your pointer finger up top to adjust the pressure. So I'm going to do circular motion, and then look at how much faster that is and how much smoother it is. So you want to try to use the side of your pencil as much as possible. Of course, in small areas, you might have to adjust. Okay, so test that out. Okay, so then for 6B, it's the darkest value, or darker value, that we're going to use. And 6B we'll test out using the tip of the graphite, circular motion. Okay, now we're going to test out using the side of the graphite, circular motion. All right, much smoother, much faster. And then for graphite, just like the colored pencils, you have to kind of build up your layers. Okay, so those are the differences between the pencils. We're going to do this value scale, and we're going to start with the number 8, which is super, super dark as you can get it without, messing up the paper. So because it's a small area, I'm still going to hold my pencil in the middle so I can kind of get an angle, and I'm still going to use a circular motion. And I'm going to switch and change directions. So I did circular motion vertically. Now I'm going to go back and do circular motion horizontally. I might try diagonally. So this is really cheap copy paper. It's like the cheapest paper. Besides the paper that newspaper is printed on, newsprint. So it will only accept so much. We call it that this paper doesn't have a lot of tooth. So it doesn't have a lot of layers to the paper. It doesn't like grab onto your graphite. And so the drawing paper that you have received has more tooth. It's also thicker paper. So you can really like work the graphite into the paper. So you're going to build up your layers because in each layer you're kind of pushing it into the paper a little bit. Okay, so I feel like that is pretty dark. So I did about 5 or 6 layers to get a level 8. So with a 6B pencil, maybe I'm only going to do like 4 layers to get a level 7. I notice that I changed direction, and then I'm going to change direction again. Probably go diagonal. And so for each little square, there should be a noticeable difference. It should look as smooth as humanly possible. If you get outside of the lines, clean it up. Craftsmanship always counts. All right, so slightly lighter. So then for the level 6, if I did about 4 layers for a 7, I'm going to try to do just 3 layers for level 6. And I'm going a little bit lighter than I did in my first 2, just because I don't want it to get too dark. You can always darken, but it's very difficult to lighten. Okay, so 6 is slightly lighter than 7. Okay, so for a 5, I'm going to try just 2 layers. And I'm going to start out fairly light, going 2 different directions. And then I'm going to go back over that with a 2B. So now I'm going to switch my pencils. I'm going to grab my 2B pencil. And so if I want something to look a little bit more smooth, like this looks kind of liney, horizontal, then, and if I don't want it to get much darker, then I would use my 2B pencil to do another layer on top to try to get it to smooth out visually. Okay, so it's still slightly lighter than 6. Okay, so for a level 4, I'm going to use my 2B pencil. And I'm going to try to just do like maybe 2 thin layers. Okay. And then now I'm going to hop to number 2, and I'm going to go as lightly as humanly possible with 1 layer. Super light. Super light. And I'm still doing, like, if I slow down my movement, I am going circular, but speed it up. It kind of looks like lines, but it is still a circular motion. So that is as light as humanly possible. And then I know, like, okay, now I need to get between those two for the level 3. So I am able to hold my pencil pretty far back, and then I'm just like kind of adjusting my pressure. The other reason why I try to hold it in the middle or far back, because you actually can't press very hard when you do that. And then plus it tells your right brain like, hey, we're not writing. You know, we're not trying to hold it down here and like, you know, scribble and color. We're actually drawing and shading. So it tells your brain that you're doing a different activity than what you normally would do holding a pencil. Okay, so this is called a value scale. Now, and it's divided up into boxes. Each box is a separate value. This one is a gradated value scale where it gradually fades out. So I am going to start with a number 2B. So I'm going to start out fairly light, and I'm going to hold my pencil horizontally using the whole side of the graphite because now we're covering a large area. Circular motion. And I always start to fade out before I think I need to, or before I need to. So I'm already at a 4 or 5. I'm going to start fading it out so I can adjust the pressure. And so the pressure comes from you kind of like lifting up your wrist, but also kind of lifting up your elbow a little bit. So it takes a little bit, you know, for your brain to tell your elbow to lift up and for it to actually happen. So I try to start fading out sooner. Okay, so then I'm going to go back and I'm going to fill in my gaps, get some clean edges in there. Do another layer in the 4 and 5 section and fade out. Because I feel like I got my 2 area pretty good. There's not a line where it just stops. It just slowly fades out into the white area. And I'm also trying to look above, like am I about at the same level? I'm gonna go a little bit darker in here. And do not use your finger to smudge. This one you're just using pressure to fade out. So pressure with your wrist, with your shoulder, etc. Do not use your finger. Do not use your finger. You get fingerprints everywhere. You will never, ever, ever use your finger again after taking this class. There's much better ways to blend and fade. Okay, so I'm going to build up my, I switched my pencil to 6B, and I'm building up my layers. And I would say turn the paper so your arm is comfortable. I'm actually going to turn this way because it's more comfortable to go add a layer vertically. So you want your shoulder to be comfortable, you want your arm to be comfortable. Okay, so I'm going to build up another layer into the 8 and fading out into the 7. Into the 6. So I feel like my 5 is pretty good. But I definitely still need to darken my 7 and 8 area. So I'm going to go a little bit heavier, so a little bit more pressure So we're working it into the copy paper. And at a certain point, this paper just won't take anymore. We can get a little bit darker on the drawing paper because it has more tooth, it grips the graphite. Okay, so just as long as it looks somewhat smooth fading out, and I would say the image on the screen does not look as smooth as mine does in person. So hopefully yours looks a little smoother. Okay, so finish that part, pause if you need to. This next part is all about light. And so we have on the note sheet, it does have like the 5 parts of light at the top just as a reminder. And we're also going to use this worksheet a lot. You're going to use it to write from as well. So over here is a description. There are 5 parts of light. You're going to write this down. You're going to take the notes. The notes are worth points. We are annotating. And those are all listed. So we're going to highlight those, or you can circle them. We have highlights. We have a middle tone or a mid-tone. We have reflected light. We have core shadows and cast shadows. So we have 5 different parts of light. On the circle, which will turn into a sphere, it does have lines, and if you look really closely, there are numbers that then correspond. Like the 1 is the highlight, which then is the 1 on the value scale. It's going to stay white. The 3, which is here, is the middle tone. And then we fade into some darker middle tones. The 6 and the 7, and then it corresponds with above, like the level 6 and 7, is down here, this little sliver at the bottom. And then an 8, we have a core shadow on the item, which is going to be about here. And we have a cast shadow on the ground, which is 8 and darker. Okay, so for where it says middle tone, we usually call that just mid. It means the same thing, it's just less to write. And the core shadow is always on the object. So it's going to be this curved part here. So we're going to say on the object. And then the cast shadow is on the surface the object is sitting. So it's on the ground here. So we're going to say on the surface the object is sitting. On the surface, the object is sitting for the cast shadow. Okay, so all of this are these lines on here. So when we draw our own, we're going to value map all the ranges of value. So we'll value map like, you know, where the really light parts are in the fabric are, where the dark parts are. We're going to draw it and like kind of give ourselves some guidelines to tell us where we need to shade. So all of this is called a value map. It's like an artist drawing a map of where they need to shade. Okay, so off to the side, we're going to do some annotating. You need to write kind of small, and we're going to write how using the 5 parts of light improves your drawing. Later on, and it's some information about the 5 parts of light. Later on, you will use this to write about. So you're actually going to use this to write about for 3 projects. This is a very handy worksheet. We use it a lot. Okay, so the first one is the highlight. So we're going to write highlight. And then I'm going to highlight it. No pun intended or pun intended. Okay, so what the highlight does is it shows us where the light source is coming from. And it's usually the shiny parts on an object. So for this one, it shows us like light is kind of coming from this side, and then we have shiny parts on the bottle. We have a light highlight part on the piece of wood. We have highlights on the cloth. We have lighter parts in the flower and shell. Those are the highlights. So shows where the light source is coming from. And then we're going to put shiny part of object. especially if you're shading glass. All right, the next one is the mid-tone. So the highlight is the lightest, it stays the white of the paper. Next one is mid-tone. So this creates the color of the object, and it might be some details. So it translates the color into a grayscale. So in reality, this apple was red, this leaf was green, the flower was pink, the shell is like tan/white, the bottle is actually like a really light green, the wood is brown, the cloth is light blue. So this is already translated into a grayscale for you, but in reality, if you're looking at something, it's in color. And so then if you have a dark mid-tone, then maybe that would be for like the color red or this darker green. I have lighter mid-tones in the flower that was pink, and then in the shell and in the light blue cloth. So your mid-tones are your lighter values, but they're not white. So creates the color of the object. So you're translating it into gray, obviously, because the graphite is gray. All right, reflected light. So reflected light is where light, well, actually, let me go up here. So let's say we have a light bulb that's hitting our sphere. This is the highlight. So wavelengths of light are straight, and so it keeps hitting past the item, all these wavelengths of light. And then if you have a surface, they hit the surface and they bounce back up. So they like hit the surface and bounce back up. So the reflected light is usually on the opposite side of the light source, and it's the science behind it, the fact that wavelengths of light don't bend, and that's why you can see starlight that's, you know, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands years old, because it's just a continuous wavelength of light. But when it hits a surface, it will bounce back. And so it's reflecting back. And that is really the big difference between a fantastic artist and an artist that's okay. If you can see the reflected light in parts, it really adds realism. So it adds realism because, and we're going to put in parentheses, science. And so when you go to write about it, you would have to remember about wavelengths of light being straight, and you have to remember the science behind it. Okay, core shadow. So I always remember the two types of shadows with a story. So the core shadow, your body has a torso, you have a core, it's where your abs are. The core of your body is on you. It's on the object. And then cast shadow is like, I think of like a pirate ship. And if you've been thrown overboard, you're cast away. You're away from the object, you're, you know, below it, etc. So the core shadow is on the object, and so we wrote that over here, on the object, and it helps create the form of the object. So helps create the form. So the part that makes that object look 3D. Okay, then we have the cast shadow. It's cast away, it's away from the object. Cast shadow. And so we wrote over here that it's sitting on the surface the object is sitting, or it's on the surface the object is sitting, sorry. So if it's on top of a table, it's darker. If it's on top of cloth, it's darker, etc. So it adds realism and shows where the light source is. So adds realism and shows where the light source is. Because your cast shadow is always on the opposite side, and so I'm going to show you guys a finished one. If light is hitting, then the object itself is blocking the light and creating a shadow. So the cast shadow is kind of what you see when you're walking in the afternoon and you have your long, funky shadow. That's your cast shadow. It's cast away from your body. It's cast away from the object. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. Part 2 will be shading. And so we'll do part 2 tomorrow. Make sure you have, we'll do that in case you want to pause it and write everything down. Make sure you have all of your notes and you have all the annotations. Okay, see you in the next video.